Thank you, Ryan. Thank you all for being here. It's good to see a number of familiar faces of people who've been working for a long time on a brighter future for Israelis and Palestinians in the Middle East at large. And I do apologize for my voice. I brought back a few germs from the Middle East as well. So, but I want to talk a little bit about our trip to Gaza and the devastating impact of the blockade that we witnessed there, and what Congress can do about it that can improve the security situation for Palestinians, Israelis, and the region as a whole. So I think one of the first things that's so striking for anyone who visits Gaza, and has anyone visited Gaza? Okay. Well, so one of the first things that's so striking is just how small it is. So it's a small strip of land on the eastern shore of the Mediterranean, bordered in the southwestern area by Egypt, that extends for just 6.8 miles, and along the Israeli border on the north and east sides for 32 miles. So very small. It's about twice the size of D.C., with 1.8 million people, but actually much of that land is uninhabitable because some of it's used for security buffer and for other areas. So very small, and also one of the most densely populated areas of the planet. And when we're there, and I should say, I mean, you can tell by just geography, the blockade that's imposed by Israel and Egypt does cut Gaza off from the rest of the world. And the blockade is a closure imposed by Israel and Egypt that prevents the free movement of people and goods in or out of Gaza by land, air, or sea. So when we're there, it was very easy to see why the UN is saying that they're predicting that Gaza will actually become unlivable in just 5 years, by 2020. And that is in large part because of the blockade's impact on just the most basic services, so access to clean water, clean drinking water, to electricity, to having a functioning sewage system, to say nothing of the impact that 3 wars in 6 years has had on Gaza. So half of Gaza's population is under the age of 18. And any child older than 6 years old in Gaza has experienced these 3 wars. Then some of the children have lost family members or their homes in every one of those wars, and we met some of those children when we were there. The war in 2014 was particularly devastating, and as Rod said, I mean, it was really marked significant escalation in the conflict at large. So during the war, 2,205 Palestinians were killed, including 1,483 civilians, at least. And of those, at least 521 were children, 238 were women. 71 Israelis were killed, including 66 Israeli soldiers, 4 Israeli civilians, 1 security coordinator. And there was also a Thai worker who was living in Israel at the time who was killed. And the rubble from that war is everywhere in Gaza. There were 18,000 homes that were either partially or entirely destroyed. And we see them everywhere. There are some neighborhoods where it seems like everything is destroyed, and if there's one house that's not destroyed, it's surprising. That left 108,000 people homeless, of whom at least 100,000 are still homeless. So you see the rubble everywhere, and you also see people who are trying to rebuild everywhere. So when you enter Gaza from the Israeli side, and you go through this labyrinth of metal corridors, and then you get through a door that's in the wall that separates Israel from Gaza. And you walk through this caged walkway that extends for 1 kilometer. And the first thing that we saw when you look through the cage and look out onto the Gazan side of the wall, are Palestinians who are their boys, young men, who are collecting rubble and putting it in these carts. And then they would take them to these places where they would compress the rubble, so these rubble compressors. They're doing this, of course, because rubble is about all they have to actually rebuild their homes. And it's also a form of employment there in Gaza, where we have the highest unemployment rate in the world. So you see people who are trying to rebuild, and this is also, I should say, a picture of one of a particularly devastated area of Gaza in Gaza, and one of the homes that was entirely demolished with children standing on top of it. So what's made this particularly difficult, of course, to rebuild from the war is the blockade. So since 2007, Israel has imposed a blockade and banned most construction materials from entering Gaza. So this is one aspect of this land, air, and sea blockade that was imposed after Hamas seized power. Israel declared Hamas a hostile entity, and then started that was a significant change in the closure policy, although there have been many other closures leading up to that point. And at that point, Israel started using mathematical formulas to calculate how many calories that residents of Gaza would have to have in order to survive. And so since then, Israel has only allowed the UN to bring in a limited quantities of reconstruction materials. It's saying that these construction materials could be used by Hamas for actually building tunnels to Egypt and to Israel for weapons smuggling and for other military purposes. Now, it's true, of course, that Hamas does use construction materials for building tunnels. Now, it's also true that any material that you're going to use to rebuild a home can also be used for a tunnel. So banning reconstruction materials has not stopped the tunnels. In fact, when you have these times of the tightest closures, so like in 2009, 2010, early 2010, when so few materials were allowed at all, that was actually the height of when of tunnels, both for the civilian economy and for military purposes. So certainly there has to be a solution to address the tunnel issue, but preventing these hundreds of Palestinians from actually being able to rebuild their homes is clearly not a solution. It's collective punishment, and as many human rights organizations have pointed out, and there have been, obviously imposing this kind of reality where people can't rebuild their homes. That's an environment that feeds extremism, feeds Hamas and other extremist organizations that are more militant than Hamas. And that is starting to be recognized by some quarters of the Israeli security establishment. Some Israeli officials, military officials, have pointed out that Hamas also uses clay bricks to build tunnels. So they get most of their materials through the black market. So long as they're, this is going to continue, that the tunnel issue has to be addressed another way, that banning or restricting reconstruction materials, it's not going to stop the tunnels, but it will stop, and it will stop, and it already has stopped Palestinians from being able to rebuild from the war. So Oxfam has estimated that if the current restrictions continue, then Gaza will not be able to rebuild from the 2014 war for another 17 years. So that won't happen till 2032. And of course, that's if there's no other wars in the meantime, and that's 12 years after the UN has predicted that Gaza will become uninhabitable. Now, one of the groups that is able to bring in some reconstruction materials is it's Catholic Relief Services. And Warda and I spent a day with them when we were in Gaza. They are building temporary shelters. They're not able to bring in concrete, but they're able to bring in, they have been able to bring in wood for rebuilding people's homes, but these are only temporary structures. There's actually only been one of the 9,000 homes that were entirely destroyed during the war. Only one has been rebuilt by UNRWA. So these are, because it's going to take so long, then they're looking at how do we house people in the meantime. So this family, you can see this better from this side. One of those beneficiaries, this is Mohammed Abu Dagar and his children who are standing on the rubble of his home. Mohammed is standing in front of a Jordanian helicopter. He was given special permission by Israel and the Jordanian government to accompany his nephew, who was grievously injured during the war. Jordan took the very rare step of taking a few Palestinians who were near death and to take them to a Jordanian hospital actually during the war. He was able to accompany his nephew, but he didn't just lose his home, and his nephew wasn't, as well as his nephew having been injured. Also, when his family was coming to say goodbye to his nephew, then they all hopped in a taxi. His mom, his brothers, and cousins got in a taxi, and they were just coming to say goodbye to them before the helicopter took off, and the taxi was attacked by a fighter jet, and everyone died instantly. So he also, because he lives in this area, Huza, which was devastated, he had a number of relatives who were living there, and 10 cousins were killed during the night of an Israeli airstrike. So what's exceptional about his case is that he was able to fly out through a Jordanian helicopter during the war. Of course, most Palestinians in Gaza can't, hard for them to dream about ever leaving Gaza. But he was able to get special permission. Clearly, he was a case where Israel did not have any security concerns about him to allow with a special mission to pick up his nephew. But his home was entirely destroyed. Fortunately, CRS, and that's the taxi where his family was, many of his family members were killed in. But these are pictures of this temporary shelter that Catholic Relief Services has built. So they brought in wood. Now they were not able, there are a lot of restrictions, there have been a lot of restrictions on the wood. So they weren't able to bring in wood that was 5 centimeters or thicker. So what they did is they brought in, they had to slice the wood planks in half, and then they glued them together when they got to Gaza. So those are the wood planks all the wood planks that you're seeing, probably can't see it from your viewpoint, but there's this slit down the middle. They had to glue that back together. And that's, that's Mohammed standing there. So that's where his family will be. Now, this August, the Israeli military expanded this ban on wood planks so that it now applies to not only wood that's over 5 centimeters or 3 centimeters as it was in the interim, but now anything 1 centimeter or thicker. At this point, it's useless for construction. Catholic Relief Services can't use that at all. Even furniture manufacturers, they can't use wood that's less than 1 centimeter thick. Now, the reason given is that what Israel is saying is that these wood planks could be used again for Hamas to use for tunnel reinforcement. For this particular project, Catholic Relief Services is monitoring the wood at every step of the way. They have cameras in the storage facilities. At every step of the way, they're ensuring that no one comes to steal their wood. Otherwise they wouldn't be able to do these projects. So they have promised that to the Israeli government, but this wood ban has remained in place. It was imposed in August, and they still have, fortunately, they sent in a lot of wood this summer, but they're going to run out soon because of this need, and now they've stopped asking donors for money for this project because they can't actually build the homes, and they've dialed it back significantly. So it's also a case where, I say this, this is one aspect, of course, of a much bigger issue of not being able to build in Gaza. It's noteworthy, though, that Israeli political officials, security figures, have said that recovery in Gaza is essential for regional stability. On the 1-year anniversary of the war this summer, a panel of senior IDF officers called on the Israeli Defense Minister Moshe Ya'alon to allow for more reconstruction materials to be allowed into Gaza. And on the wood issue in particular, some Israeli officials have recognized that this is a vital need for Gaza. Gaza used to have a thriving furniture industry, and while it's certainly struggling now, this ban in place will completely wipe out the furniture industry, one of the few manufacturing industries that's still left there, and again, highest unemployment rate in the world. So despite this, the ban on any wood over a centimeter was imposed in August. In September, Israel made a big announcement saying that for the first time since 2007, when the current blockade was imposed, that people in Gaza would be able to sell their furniture in Israel. When we were talking about this with people in Gaza, of course, they saw this as a cruel joke because if they're now able to sell the furniture in Israel, but they can't actually get the wood that's essential for making the furniture. So it's not helping. Now, Gisha is an Israeli human rights organization that has written a very good letter. We have copies of it back there. I have more here. If people are interested, to the Israeli military, that really lay out this case in detail, calling for Israel to lift the blanket ban on wood, unusable wood planks into Gaza. And they said, they have a great quote saying, almost every resident of Gaza is harmed by the impact of this decision.